corridor in Detroit. This is the Metro. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, part of Detroit's iconic skyline is soon to change.
We'll reflect on the history of the RenCen, and tomorrow we'll discuss the newly proposed plans for its future.
Plus, we hear from Dearborn Mayor Abdullah Hammoud after the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant for war crimes.
And we examine Michigan's high maternal mortality rate and efforts to address it. We'll take your calls in the next hour.
Did the healthcare system provide the support you needed in your birthing journey? We want to know. The number is 313-577-1019.
But first, the sleek leather interior of a car. It feels a certain way against your skin, sometimes too hot in the summer. It's part of the whole car experience, one that's especially sacred to us here in the Motor City. But what happens to it all? And what happens to that leather that doesn't get used? The pieces with slight imperfections, for example, it all gets marked for the landfill, adding to the automotive industry's massive carbon footprint. That brings us to Pingree, Detroit. The worker-owned company reclaims leather from the automotive industry that's destined for the landfill. They take that leather and fashion it into wearable leather and home goods, accessories, and custom footwear. The latter makes them especially unique. In the U.S., shoemaking is a dying art. Joining the show to chat more about Pingree, Detroit, and all that goes into the business is the founder and CEO, Jared Sloft, and Nathaniel Crawford II, a co-owner of Pingree and the VP of Footwear Operations. Jared and Nate, welcome to the Metro.
It's good to be with you.
Awesome. So, Jared, the Metro likes to place a focus on change makers in Detroit, people finding solutions to pressing problems. And that speaks to Pingree's origin and mission. So talk a little bit about that, the origin there.
Of course. Well, it's good to be with y'all, and hello to all the listeners out there. So we didn't start really as a business. It started with an idea in mind. It started with how can we be a part of solving this problem that we're seeing, where we're finding amazing, hardworking folks looking for opportunity who wanted to have meaningful work with their hands. Some of them, all Detroiters, veterans, folks in my neighborhood. And that coupled with this opportunity where in the production of brand new cars, there is all this material that goes to landfill. In a previous career of mine, I worked at the state of Michigan in the Office of Pollution Prevention. And one of my jobs was to literally design a program to reduce the waste streams from all these companies and businesses and nonprofits in Michigan. And so as this byproduct exchange initiative, even though I was more or less a glorified intern, I kind of created this moment where I knew that, hey, here's a problem. And then a decade later is when I started Pingree Detroit.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. You were placed in this position to kind of see where these things were going, and you found your own pathway, discovering new pathways for recyclable goods. But just thinking about that, my brain is just thinking about like your creative outlet in it all. So when you're doing this, you're going through, you're processing, you're trying to find new creative outlets and new creative ways for some of this material to be recycled and to be reused. In what way did you see your creativity start to peak as you're starting to do this work?
Yeah, so even just, I love to connect with people, and everyone has so many gifts that we can share. And so when we started with, again, it didn't start as a business. We knew we want to support these folks who are looking for opportunity. When I first started the company, we literally we thought that a fundraiser was going to be the actual thing we're going to do, but I met an individual who was overcoming some adversity, and he and I did a listening campaign for like 3 months, and we sat down with nonprofits and shelters and block clubs and just asked the question, what do you need? What are the gaps? How can we be of service? And so many folks were saying they want to work with their hands. They want to create something. And in Detroit, the answer was, okay, well, what can we do about it? So this opportunity to, I love connecting with people, supporting people, and leveraging our shared gifts to create something special. And so we're like, okay, what can we do in Detroit? And in a conversation with an elder in my neighborhood, I was telling everyone I want to do something to, create something and help these folks. Like, it sounds like you're about to be the boots on the ground in Detroit. I was like, boots, we should make boots. And had no idea how hard it was going to be at the time. And thanks to this guy, we got to launch shoemaking in 2018. We launched the company in 2015.
That's insane. I love that. Once again, how your mind just kind of said, I think I found it. I found it. So, talk a little bit more about, how you all, especially you being this person who's always been, I guess you can say a social activist. You've always been someone who's been a fighter for recycling. So talk about being a kid and how that inspired you growing up to do what you're doing today. I know as a kid, you were one of those people who would champion recycling in school.
I was. A little known fun fact, I started the first ever recycling program for Waterford schools when I was a 7th grader. So I can't put it on my resume, so I gotta tell somebody about it, right? But I just Captain Planet was a big hero of mine. Watching that cartoon growing up, me and 80s babies, right? So we love this idea. The power is yours, and so it just started with an inquiry of, okay, if something's wrong, what can I do about it?
Yeah.
Is there someone I can help? Is there something I can add into that's already happening, or is there something I need to do myself that doesn't already exist? And so that led to other activities, led to kind of doing work in an organizing space around environmental justice, climate organizing, tar sands activism, like trying to stop. They were literally even into after college on the Detroit River. Folks might have remembered they were illegally dumping petroleum coke on the shores. This Marathon Petroleum. They were doing it without a permit. No one was doing anything about it. The neighborhood was asking and saying, like, someone should do something about this, and having the community show and lead the way and having us just play a support role. I co-founded a nonprofit called the Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands and then the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands. Just say, hey, let's not have folks become a sacrifice zone for the pursuit of profit. And so that idea of putting people first also were kind of the seeds that led to how can we create a worker-owned co-op here in Detroit where the prioritization of well-being maximized is at the forefront of everything we do.
Oh, man. We're going to get back to that with you in a moment, Jared. But Nate, bringing you in, you are a co-founder of the company as well. Yeah. And, there's so much. It's so interesting. Number one, you're a shoemaker. I find that to be completely magical. Like, once again, Detroiters using their hands is such an amazing thing. But talk about being the co-owner of Pingree and how you got into it and the love that you have for creating.
Oh, wow. It's a passion. I used to draw when I was younger, but I was born and raised in the city of Detroit.
What part?
And east side and west side. I grew up by King High School.
Okay.
Went to King, King grad, and went to Wayne State for a little bit as well.
Shout out.
And was raised over by the west side, over by Cooley.
Mm-hmm.
And just being in the community, my mom had me in different services in the community. I was raised in PAL football, PAL baseball, March of Dime walks, breast cancer awareness walks. I was also at NYSP, National Youth Sports Program at Wayne State back in the day. It was like a summers program they used to have at the gym. All these different events around the city and just that sense of service, and got in the Air Force.
Yeah.
My ASVAB scores were pretty high, so I had a sense of service before self. So that was clinging to me with the Air Force and their motto. And I brought it home. Looking for work, looking for well-meaningful work, and came across Pingree Detroit. They were looking for veterans, local Detroiters and makers, people good with their hands. Being good as I was younger, used to draw a lot. And I said, let me take on this challenge, doing something different in the community. Like you said, we're 80s, baby. I'm Kwame. I got my ring, man. So if I can help with upcycling leather, and it's learning a trade.
Exactly.
And then here's the full circle. After 2 years of being with Pingree Detroit, my dad tells me, hey, your granddad was a cobbler. I said, what? Come on now.
It's in your blood. It's in your genes.
In the blood. So this is where I'm supposed to be. So
exactly.
Yeah, if I can keep building on the excellence like that and bring some greatness to this company's worker co-op. That's another thing too, of learning a different way of how to work in the community.
Yeah.
Instead of it being a one business owner, it's a worker co-op, and it has opened many doors in the community in this environment of different avenues in how to help the community. So we are able to donate leather with different community organizations, open up grocery stores. We got the Detroit Food Co-op. Oh man, I've been able to connect with those guys. So it's being able to be involved. I always say being an essential part of something bigger than yourself is crucial. It's key.
Yes, if you're just tuning into the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM, I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent. We're chatting with Jared Sloft and Nathaniel Crawford II about Pingree, a local business that reclaims leather from the auto industry. Nate, keeping you here for a moment. So, I love the full circle moment. You find out that you have shoes in your blood in one way or another. And I love the fact as well, you talk about this community support here. So, Nate, I want you to talk about building on that and teaching others the trade that you have now learned, and hopefully soon you're a master. You're a master shoemaker.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I consider myself still a novice, but I take it it's in the blood, so it's going to come out eventually.
Yeah.
I've been a co-owner for about 6 years, and in that growth, I've been able to talk with many different groups, different podcasts. On Fox 2, we've been able to talk with different groups. We even do a skilled trades training for industrial sewing, craftsmanship over at nearby Bates Institute, across the street on Livernois, on the west side of Detroit. And then I was also able to do talks at the Detroit Library last year for the city of this. We were designated. UNESCO designated Detroit as a city of design, first and only city in the U.S. And I was able to give a talk on shoemaking at the Detroit Library last year. So that was pretty awesome, man.
Yes,
this is
you can say the least there. And before I let both of you go, because we're running here on the time, I want to ask both of you about the importance of the business that Pingree is, the business model, the relationships that you all have been able to build together, and then the importance of the work that you do. So we're going to start with you, Jared. Give us that rundown there.
Of course. So one also really exciting thing is we're just launching as of this Thursday our open materials library at our workshop. Got some support from Haggerty, so folks can literally come and get leather remnants that was otherwise destined for the landfill at no cost. As long as you're a Detroit resident, you get free leather. So literally on Thursdays, you can find more on our website, but folks can literally come, pop in, get some materials. We've already supported over 90 majority women of color with donations. So we like to say that, everything we make smells like a new car, because it nearly was. And so really we're creating impact wherever we can. And at the core, we're here to inspire. We have everything from shoes to bags to pet products to wallets. And we do reinvest 77% of our profits right back in the workers who make everything. Wow. So folks that might want some gifts for the holidays, all gifts have the impact. Come with little maker cards, who made your stuff. Cool. And really just, we like to say relationships are our strongest currency.
Yeah, Nate.
Indeed. Oh, man. Jared, I usually tell folk we got so much leather, we do know what to do with it. So definitely come check us out. Some of our outlets, Arts and Scraps, we've been able to donate to. Detroit Boxing Gym is a recent organization we've been able to donate to. And local makers and designers, they'll come up to us at Easter Market or different pop-ups at Rust Belt as well. And we'll let them know about the scrap leather that we have. And, it's many opportunities. I love it.
PingreeDetroit.com. Check us out.
I love that so much. And I really do look forward to getting back into it with both of you all, because I want to know more about the process and what it takes to actually put leather into new uses. I mean, it seems almost impossible, but it's not, because you all are doing it at Pingree.
That's true.
Jared Sloft is the founder and CEO of Pingree Detroit. Nathaniel Crawford II is a co-owner of Pingree and vice president of footwear operations. Thank you both for joining us on the Metro, and happy holidays.
It was a gift. Thanks so much, y'all.
Indeed.
Coming up at 11, Michigan got a C- on care for pregnant women and infants in a recent report. We want to hear from you. Did you have a hospital birth? Were you well cared for before, during, and after your birth? Or maybe you chose to have a home birth. What was that like? Let us know. The number is 313-577-1019.
Coming up next, there is an arrest warrant out for Israel's prime minister for war crimes. Dearborn's Mayor Abdullah Hammoud responds to the ruling from the International Criminal Court. Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Last week, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes, including, quote, starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. Hamas military chief Mohammed Daif was also issued a warrant for war crimes from the ICC. He's suspected of being killed in an airstrike this year. The ruling from the International Criminal Court follows an investigation that confirms widespread reporting about Israel's war crimes. The ruling also underlines the rallying cry of Metro Detroit's Arab American community for the Biden administration to end the war. That ultimately led to President-elect Trump winning Dearborn as part of a protest vote against the Biden-Harris administration. I spoke with Dearborn Mayor Abdullah Hammoud about the ICC's ruling and how Israel's wars on Gaza and Lebanon are affecting Arab American residents in Dearborn. Mayor Abdullah Hammoud, thank you for joining me.
Of course, thank you for having me.
How does international law and its institutions like the ICC impact Americans and Dearborn residents? What does this ruling mean?
Well, immediately upon finding out, I came forward and I said if any war criminal were to take a step within the city limits of the city of Dearborn, we would arrest. And I would call on city officials across this country to make the same declaration, regardless of who we have as president. If our president does not want to uphold international law, we as mayors, as local leaders across the country should declare that we will uphold international law. You're seeing now many European countries. France just came forward and said they will uphold the ICC arrest warrants. Now Benjamin Netanyahu or any other war criminal is not allowed to step foot within France's borders. The degradation of international law is happening before us each and every single day. Yesterday we saw the vote on the U.S. Senate floor to try to end the supply of offensive weapons to the Israeli military.
Right.
18 or 19 Democratic U.S. senators, depending on the resolution, supported this. But it was a degradation of international law that we saw before the U.S. Senate floor, knowing outright that the supplying of such weaponry was actually against international law, and it was potentially a war crime.
And meanwhile, we know that the U.S. just vetoed a ceasefire resolution before the United Nations as well.
It's a pattern we have seen within this administration, unfortunately, unwillingness to hold Benjamin Netanyahu accountable, and rather an eagerness to participate in the genocide that Israel is committing across Palestine to broaden the war across the region. And President Biden has failed in this sense. And I believe that this will be what he is remembered for, the president who enabled, who catalyzed, and who funded genocide.
And what are you hearing from your constituents in Dearborn? We know that there was a big protest vote in Dearborn that a lot of residents either they didn't vote, they voted for Trump, they voted for Jill Stein. We know that Jill Stein captured 18% of the vote in Dearborn. President-elect Trump received 42%. I'm wondering if you're hearing hope, if you're hearing despair, or probably a range of emotions.
I'm hearing grief. If you come to Dearborn as of late, we have funeral services just about each and every single day. Now, I've attended funerals for one or two individuals before at the same ceremony. Now you're attending ceremonies for 12, for 18, for 24 on a day, and you have multiple mass ceremonies a week. And so it's grief that has struck this community. And so what I often tell folk is don't just analyze precinct data and come to me with your analysis of what happened within the city of Dearborn. Come and speak to our residents. The first Lebanese-American citizen that was killed was a Dearborn resident, known to a prominent family within our city. Prominent not because of wealth or anything of that nature, prominent because of how generous they were in supporting and uplifting those around them and giving to those who don't have much. We had residents who came forward when we passed the first ceasefire resolution. A resident from Gaza who had lost 70 family members. His whole family tree had been wiped. And so these are the stories of how the war that is thousands of miles away is impacting our residents directly each and every single day.
And you too, as a Lebanese American, what has this been like for you?
My wife has lost 5 relatives to date, one of which was a paramedic. My wife's grandmother passed away about 2 months ago now in Lebanon. She was ill, but her and her family, her mother, were not able to fly to Lebanon to attend the burial. So even having that closure, oftentimes that people find in attending a burial service, that was not granted to many families. The home in which my father-in-law built for his parents in Lebanon has been decimated. Our Wayne County Commissioner spoke to the story of the stairway in which he grew up in, the stairway of his father's home, has now been blown up. Villages are being wiped off the face of this earth. They are clearly targeting civilian infrastructure, and it's a clear violation of international law. And so for many of us in Dearborn, each and every single day we're getting messages. Right now, my wife's aunts are moving day to day. There was a residential tower that was just brought down by a 2,000-pound American-made missile just a few days ago. Mm-hmm. And she was in the adjacent tower, captured the whole thing on her phone and sent it over to the group chat and said, I must move again. They are moving 3, 4, 5 times. My grandfather's sister, who I love, sent me a voice note. This is a 90-plus-year-old woman who is blind and wheelchair-bound, who should be preparing to meet her creator, rather sending us voice notes saying, I've had to move now 2 to 3 times. Is there any financial support one can offer to help me ensure that I can pay the rent? No one should have to be going through that. That should not be a voice note that anybody should need to send, let alone a 90-plus-year-old woman in the conditions that she is in. And so many of us in Dearborn, this is what we live. We wake up in the morning and we check in on our families. What happened while we were sleeping? How many people were killed? This is just a day-to-day life now.
You're a high-profile elected leader calling for an end to this pain, to this devastation, to this destruction that for many of us Arab Americans, I mean, as you have just described, it's waking up to a nightmare every day. You're calling for an end to Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza and Lebanon. And Dearborn has been at the center of the uncommitted movement. And yes, Dearborn is home to the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the U.S., but there are Arab Americans all over the country. Why has Dearborn, do you think, played such a pivotal role in the anti-war movement and solidarity beyond just what you have described, which is this gut-wrenching pain and despair?
You know, for the media, it's easier for mainstream media to speak of Dearborn because it's the city that everybody knows to be predominantly Arab American. And I would still bet that the majority of media has no idea what Dearborn actually entails, who lives within the city limits of Dearborn, and what Dearborn actually is. For us, when the uncommitted movement came forward, and credit to the organizers, Abbas, Lexi, Layla, it started in the city of Dearborn by Dearborn residents, and it flourished organically across this country. But I think that speaks volumes that the anti-war, pro-justice movement is not one that is limited to the Arab American community by any means. It is one that is supported in a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-faith fashion. One of the strongest organizing groups alongside the uncommitted movement was the Jewish Voices for Peace, and they still remain one of the strongest organizing groups across this country for justice. And so I think that's what's most important to highlight. When the uncommitted vote happened in the state of Michigan in the presidential primary, 73 of 83 counties had 10% or more of their vote cast towards uncommitted in that presidential election. That's what got you over 100,000 votes. It wasn't just Arabs and Muslims. And so I think that's also needs to be made clear. And so you're seeing a lot of talk, obviously, political pundit analyses post-election. You see a lot of finger pointing towards the city of Dearborn. Mm-hmm. I'll also remind people, you know, I believe that the vice president's reluctance to differentiate herself and to distance herself from President Biden on the issue of Gaza may have cost her the state of Michigan. But knowing that Donald Trump won every swing state across this country, There was a lot more that we need to dig into. Dearborn did not cost the president the election. I want to keep, we need to remain humble. Dearborn does not have that level of power. And so I think there's a clear disconnect between the Democratic Party and what people are wanting and saying on the ground. That the issues we've been advocating for, majority of Democrats believe, majority of independents support, even the majority of young Republicans agree that we need an offensive arms embargo against the Israeli government.
And while you could say that Dearborn doesn't have this immense amount of power politically, it did send a very powerful message.
I agree. And what I often tell folk is I spoke to many of the aunts and uncles that were going out to vote. And it was a great debate. Were they going to cast their vote third party? Were they going to leave the top blank? Were they not going to come out and vote at all? How they were going to vote? And for many people, the feeling of betrayal is what resonated strongest. You're talking precincts in which President Biden won 80% plus. Vice President Harris only took 12 to 18 points. That sounds a loud message. And if you look down ballot, the Dearborn residents voted for the majority of the Democratic candidates, 65% plus, overwhelmingly. Whether that was Congresswoman Tlaib, State Representative Alabaz Farhat, our two new, Supreme Court justices, Kyra Harris Bolden and Kimberly Ann Thomas. And so Dearborn voted overwhelmingly for these other candidates, who they believed were pro-justice, anti-war, anti-genocide, and distanced themselves from what was happening. I think that should send a message clearly that there was a backlash against pro-genocide candidates.
I wonder how it makes you feel about the Democratic Party more broadly. I mean, I think about this line between what it means to be a Democrat at the local and state level versus on the national level. And that feels quite confusing.
Since the post 9/11 era, for the last 20-some years of my life, the Dearborn community, the Arab American community, Muslim American community, more broadly speaking, has never found alignment with a presidential candidate on foreign policy.
That's fair.
It wasn't Bush, it wasn't Obama, it wasn't Biden, it wasn't Trump, and it will not be the next president. I think we should say that outright. However, for 20 years, we made the issue of voting on foreign policy issues as secondary. Mm-hmm. What you heard in this presidential election was the genocide is unprecedented, the level of suffering is unprecedented, the number of innocent men, women, and children slaughtered is unprecedented, and we can no longer make the issue secondary. So it must be primary alongside the issue of workers' rights, unions' rights, universal health care coverage, protecting our environment, ensuring a green future for our children. And so that was the message that Dearborn residents were saying. We want a president who's going to prioritize all these issues. And so I think that is what's reflected in these results. I'm a Democrat not because of anybody else that declares himself a Democrat. Mm-hmm. I'm a Democrat because of Local 600, which is the largest UAW local in this state. Because my grandfather came over in the early 70s, found a job at a bakery until he ended up on the line in the autos. My father came here in the early 80s, worked at a station until he ultimately landed a job as a truck driver delivering steel for the autos. Many of us are Democrats because of our working class upbringing and because the values that Democrats preached for working people. Mm-hmm. Not because we're this cult that follows whoever the Democratic Party puts at the top of the ticket. We do not believe in that. In the city of Dearborn, and I think this is a proud principle that almost all Americans would agree on, vote for the candidate based on the policies that they perpetuate and that they speak to. Don't vote for the candidate blindly because they declare themselves to be affiliated with one party or the other. There are many times when I see Democrats taking votes. We saw many Democrats, dozens, taking votes just yesterday on the Senate floor that I disagreed with. And so if my allegiance to a party was because of one person's affiliation with the party, that's a bad reason to be affiliated with a party.
Mayor Hammoud, I want to close out on what we began this conversation talking about, and that is the International Criminal Court, which again has issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas military chief Mohammed Daif for war crimes. Mm-hmm. Does this mean anything without having the backing of the U.S. in acknowledging these war crimes?
This is monumental. This is historic. Even yesterday's U.S. Senate vote, although it did not pass, was historic. It was the first time in the history of our country in which a vote took place in the Senate floor to prevent the shipment of offensive military weapons to the state of Israel in this ongoing genocide. That is progress. What the ICC arrest warrants demonstrate is they demonstrate progress. And that is where hope lies. Hope lies in progress. My hope is not in any one individual or any one political party. My hope is in people. People across this country who have been protesting for over a year. People across this globe who have been protesting by the millions over the last year. I think we're one generation away from having pro-justice, anti-war elected members of Congress take the majority. And I think that should strike fear into the eyes of war criminals across the globe.
That was Dearborn Mayor Abdullah Hammoud. We spoke after the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas military chief Mohammed Daif. The Metro reached out to local Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Federation of Detroit, for their reaction. They said they couldn't speak on an international topic like this.
This is the Metro. Coming up, Detroit's RenCen is about to go through a lot of changes. We'll hear about some of those plans next. This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Coming up at 11, Michigan got a C- on care for pregnant women and infants in a recent report. So we want to hear from you. Did you have a hospital birth? Were you well cared for before, during, and after your birth? Or maybe you chose to have a home birth. What was that like? Let us know. The number is 313-577-1019.
But right now, what will become of the space where the RenCen now exists? That's the question on a lot of people's minds. That's because 2 towers of the RenCen are set to be demolished and the complex is set to be revamped with at least $250 million of tax support. The new proposal includes a pedestrian promenade that connects the city to the riverfront and the construction of more housing. In May, Stephen Henderson sat down with urban consultant Harriet Saperstein to discuss what would become of the RenCen after GM left the site. Here is Harriet speaking about what many people think of the RenCen.
I'm not surprised about GM because the place and Renaissance Center has just seemed empty and vacant for quite some time. You would go in there and feel like already that it was a ghost tower. But we're starting with a terrible architecture. I've got to say that Portman's design, which he's done in other cities as well, was always designed to be internal. He didn't care at all about how people got in and out. He didn't care at all about how the community, the buildings he built related to the rest of the community. But it has become an icon. If you stand, the picture that we show of Detroit tends to be the carousel on Cullen Plaza, which I love and which represents much of the work I did, and then Renaissance Center in the past. And I've talked to some of my neighbors some say, let's get it down. It's awful. It's terrible. But it is an icon now of who we are. And it can't go down. And the question is, how do we reuse it? How do we make it viable? I don't care about the 2 little towers. I think they could probably go down and give us a space. The crucial thing is how we keep the riverfront protected. I will give GM credit. It's left the riverfront open, and it's helped us do the rest of it. Because the riverfront now is what's making Detroit both recognized and almost powerful in some respects in terms of how it draws people all over the place. How do we connect that to downtown?
Right. So I want to ask you what you think of what was done with the RenCen. I mean, the original design, as you point out, was extremely unwelcoming. And I don't know that a lot of people even remember the big concrete structures that stood between the RenCen and Jefferson Avenue. When they first built it, they were a part of the air conditioning, the HVAC system for the towers. But you couldn't even see the front door of the Renaissance from Jefferson without kind of straining. Those came down at some point. And then, of course, GM opened up the backside of the RenCen on the riverfront. It was built, I think this is a great irony. It was built on the river with no views, really, of the river in most of the lower part of the building. GM changed that and created that plaza. Do you feel like those changes, I guess, Harriet, make it a more important part of the riverfront than it was originally? I mean, when people say take it down, I think they're thinking of what it used to be, not maybe what it is now.
Yeah, you can't see me shaking my head yes as I agree with you.
Okay.
When they had those barriers in front, it was the example of how they were totally isolating themselves, both from the downtown and to some extent the riverfront, but they were crucial. And giving Matt Cullen, their key person, one of their key persons, time to be an important and essential part of the Riverfront Conservancy is why we have the Riverfront Riverwalk today, which makes Detroit, again, a very important both architectural and visual and functional city in the list of cities that we have. They were closing it off. That's all Portland ever wanted to do, and GM was happy with that. Ford left. GM at least stayed, but they closed themselves off. They were separate. What do we do with those 5 buildings? I'm going to let the other 2 go, those 2 extra ones. But what are we going to do with those 5 to both reflect the new kinds of patterns of where do nonprofits go for offices, where do basically more schools start? We could have a school in one of those buildings. That might be very interesting. I don't want to compete with the Center for Creative Studies, but there's lots of technical schools that we could do. And imagine trying to bring them the young people that are in. Oddly enough, I just discovered in getting ready for the program that my daughter, who is now in her 60s, was one of the people that put a shovel in the ground when Renaissance Center started. She doesn't even remember that, but I found a picture that did that.
Like so, at the groundbreaking, right?
Yeah, the groundbreaking. But, because it's there, it is the image of Detroit. The carousel against RenCen is the image of Detroit that people have when we look at a positive image. There's lots of negative ones, unfortunately. And we need to reflect those positive images and make them even stronger. We need to take Black Bottom and the history of what we had, the immigrant patterns that came in, and make them a part. Why don't we get a museum down there? We talked about an aquarium down there. Cleveland has both of those. Cleveland has the museum. Other places have Baltimore has the aquarium. What could we do that would be an institution that would basically bring people down to visit and to stay and give them another additional way of remembering the past of Detroit, the present of Detroit, in order to build up the future of Detroit? That's what GM needs to think about. That's what we all have to think about so that GM doesn't think only in corporate terms.
That was Stephen Henderson speaking with urban consultant Harriet Saperstein about the history of the RenCen and what could become of the space now that GM has left and 2 buildings are planned to be raised. Tomorrow, we'll be speaking more about this. What do you want to become of the space where the RenCen exists, and who should pay for it? Call in and let us know tomorrow, 313-577-1019. Now, people are talking about the RenCen, but it's only the part of Detroit that's in the news. Not the only part of Detroit that's in the news. Not the only thing. Not the only thing, Robin.
Yes, Detroit is in the news in many different ways.
So many ways.
All the time. Like other American cities, Detroit is old. Its infrastructure includes things like gas stoves, basement boilers, and unfortunately, lead. Detroit's been speeding up the process of removing its lead lines. To discuss that, producer Sam Corey spoke with Jeff Patrick. He's president and CEO of Hard Rock HDD. That's an underground utilities company that's frequently contracted by Detroit to replace lead lines. They began by speaking about a time Jeff had to replace a lead line without waking up the residents of the home who were lying asleep next to him.
You were telling me a story of trying not to wake up some folks while they were sleeping, and you were working in their house. Can you tell me that story?
Sure. We were doing a job over, I think it was Glastonbury, over west of Southfield Freeway. This was in 2019. The homeowner wanted to have the water line done. We went into the basement to inspect where the meter was and how we were going to go about doing the job. And it was very dark. We had to use a flashlight, and we realized there were people sleeping. There were mattresses on the floor. So that posed a very unique element to that project, but the homeowners still wanted us to proceed and keep doing the work, and we had to install a water line and not wake anybody up. And that always poses some challenges, but we actually managed to install the line and never woke anybody up.
Yeah, what did you...
walking past them with tools and pipe and...
Did you have to use a jackhammer? You had to use loud equipment, right?
We did. We hung a blanket over the doorway to try to muffle the sound. We managed to do it, and nobody woke up. And I don't even know if the people even knew we were there working.
It's so wild. Did you have a rule that, like, we're not going to use these tools for more than 5 seconds at a time? Because if we do, that'll disturb them.
I believe I jumped in and did a lot of the inside work just because I wanted to make sure that we didn't disrupt anybody. But I had to have other employees in there to help roll out the copper and some of those variables as we pulled the pipe through. But we did it, and nobody got mad, and we managed not to wake anybody up.
Tell me a little bit about the logistics of replacing a line. What do you replace the lead line with?
Typically, most cities prefer copper. Copper is strong. You can feel it, touch it, bend it. It's difficult to break, and it also has electrolysis type, so current can flow through it. So if you get a line that actually freezes for some reason, you can actually thaw it using equipment to thaw the line out from a different point.
That's so wild. That's just a really wild idea that, like, yeah, these lines can freeze, especially in the winter when it gets really cold. And one way to heat it up, because electromagnetism can flow through it, right? Like electrons can flow through it, so you can simply just heat it up, and then it keeps working.
Correct. There's some people that had used some creative ways, and I won't get into that because I don't want anybody trying some of those things. But there are machines that will transfer electricity through those lines and actually heat the pipe up so that it can melt any ice blockages.
If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Jeff Patrick on the Metro. He's the CEO of Hard Rock HDD, a company that is contracted by local governments to replace lead lines. He does most of his jobs in Detroit. You get to see so much. I mean, you're around people's homes, you're in people's homes, you're in different parts of the city. What have you learned about the city since doing this job?
So the biggest thing is the improvements that the city is making within the city itself. The advancements, the new businesses coming in, the new streets, new sidewalks. It's a really rapidly growing city. And it's kind of neat to see because when we first started, people like me were scared to come into the city of Detroit and work. They didn't know what to expect. They knew there was a lot of utilities and there was a lot of fears in people's minds of, oh yeah, we don't work in Detroit. Well,
can I ask you about that, Jeff? Like what were you afraid of? What was intimidating about it?
So intimidating, more so the fear of the unknown, how people will treat you, how people will receive you. It's just a different environment. I'm used to, honestly, I live out in the country. I can go up and knock on a door, and I'm usually able to walk in somebody's house, a complete stranger, within minutes. Well, we came to Detroit, and we'd knock on the door, and not knowing how to approach a person in Detroit for their own fears that who are you, why are you at my door, who gave you permission to be here, what is your intentions, those things are going through their mind, and you're also having challenges of trying to let them know that you're sincere, you're there to help them. So it's a little bit of a salesmanship.
Mm-hmm.
I now have a process. I walk up, I knock on the door firmly, but not too hard, not too soft, and ring the doorbell, and then I step off their porch and wait for the homeowner to come to the door. I do that in respect of it's their property. I don't want to be in their space. I've learned that if you have the right body movement, the right demeanor when you're speaking with someone, honestly, I've been in people's houses in the city of Detroit faster than I can somebody out in the country now. I've really started to learn what people's hot buttons are, I'll call it, what their fears might be, and I address them immediately to make sure that they're comfortable.
Were you, I guess, surprised, or were you treated differently than you thought you might be when working in the city?
Initially, because I didn't have a process, so I'd stumble over my words a little bit. That makes people uncomfortable. If I'm not confident and know exactly what to say and what they're probably going to ask, that puts up a red flag to them of, okay, maybe I shouldn't trust this person. So we've learned to do certain things in a certain way, and I teach our employees how to talk to somebody, how to address them in a manner that is very non-threatening and address any concerns that they might have before you even walk into their house. Be respectful. Don't wear dirty shoes into their house. Request if they would like, you will go to their side door or their back door to enter their basement. I ask our employees never to enter through a person's front door and do not disrupt their personal space and their personal lives.
I'm wondering what the hardest project you've ever worked on is, what that looked like.
I'll give you a story. We did a job over in Bangortown.
Which is in Detroit, just north of Hamtramck.
Yep. Kashmir was the name of the street, and we had to replace all of the lead services in one entire block. And we were still within what the city called a pilot program. We were helping the city learn what things to do, what things not to do, how to keep the homeowners happy, what things to make other contractors be more diligent to keep homeowners happy. So I had a particular home. I would knock on the door, and I would see the homeowner come to the door. She would peek through the curtain, and she would walk away. And then I'd go on to the next house. And every day I would go up to that same house, and I would knock on the door and try to talk to the homeowner. And she would never talk to me, but I was persistent, and we'd keep working out there. And I want to say after about 20 to 25 times, I finally got the homeowner to open the door, and she handed me a phone. And on the other end of that phone was a woman. She spoke Polish and also English. And she said, what do you want? And the lady was scared, and I understood 100%. She was scared, like, why is this guy coming to my house and won't go away, and he's coming there every day about the same time and knocking on my door trying to talk to me. So I finally explained it to her friend and handed her back the phone, and within minutes, I was down in her basement. Got to look at her water meter, and I observed there was lead line coming into her basement, and then we opened up the street and also the sidewalk and proceeded to replace that line. The only thing was, I told my employees, I said, nobody's allowed in the house, just me. She has a comfort. I don't want to disrespect that. Nobody else can go in and do this line. And everybody stayed outside. I did all the work inside, cleaned it up, made sure I put everything back to exactly how it was supposed to be. And when we got all done, she spoke in English, but she said, how much do I owe? And I turned to her and I said proudly, I said, ma'am, you owe nothing. I said, the city has paid for it and you are good. And I saw the tears rolling. I'm like, oh my goodness, she just placed that much faith in me and trust. And I didn't jeopardize it. She expected the worst and was able to overcome that. That is the hardest I have had to work at doing any water service I've ever done.
Detroit is really old. It's an old city like a lot of American cities. In your estimation, how many lead lines are left in the city to be replaced?
You get some variance of whether or not a house is going to have lead or not have lead based on the age. I believe I've heard there's around 80,000 remaining. But they still need to do their investigations to make sure there's not a mistake made anywhere.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Jeff Patrick. He's the president and CEO of Hard Rock HDD, an underground utilities construction company that's contracted by local governments to replace lead lines. Lead is a really dangerous toxin, particularly for children. It can disrupt healthy cognitive processes.
And that brings us to our second hour. Maternal mortality is really high in the U.S. compared with other wealthy countries, and it's particularly high in Michigan. Next, we're going to talk about why that is and what can be done about it. And we want to include you in the conversation. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? What was it like? Do you trust the hospital and healthcare system to deliver your baby? Or does your distrust of the medical system make you not want to have kids altogether? Call and let us know at 313-577-1019.
From the WDET newsroom, Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy will not charge Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams for having a concealed weapon without a permit. Williams was a passenger in a car driven by his brother when they were stopped.
General Motors and Bedrock have proposed a $1.6 billion project to redevelop 2 of the 5 towers and create a 6-acre park along the Detroit riverfront. We will talk more about that tomorrow.
In sports, the Pistons snapped a 3-game losing streak, beating the Toronto Raptors 102-100 at Little Caesars Arena. Jaden Ivey's 2-point jump shot at the buzzer won it for Detroit. He finished with 25 points.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Maternal mortality is notably higher in the U.S. in comparison with other wealthy countries, and it is especially high in Michigan. So in this hour, we're going to talk about why that is and what can be done about it.
And we want to include you in the conversation. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? What was it like? Do you trust the hospital and healthcare system to deliver your baby? Or does your distrust of the medical system make you not want to have kids altogether? Let us know. Give us a call, 313-577-1019. We are waiting for you.
So, as we've just noted, prenatal healthcare in the United States, it's not in the best of shape, and that means worse health outcomes for pregnant mothers and their babies. Now, it's especially bad in Detroit. According to a new report from the advocacy organization March of Dimes, Detroit had the highest preterm birth rate of any U.S. city at over 15%.
And there are glaring racial differences in maternal mortality rate nationally. The number of Black and American Indian women who die as a result of giving birth is over 50 per 100,000 people. The maternal mortality rates for white, Hispanic, and Asian women are all below 20 per 100,000 people.
That report paints a grim picture. But there are people and organizations that are working hard to improve healthcare for soon-to-be and recent moms. That help can take many forms, including support from doulas, midwives, and postnatal counseling.
A new program, the SOS Maternity Network, is bringing together several organizations in hopes to reduce preeclampsia and preterm birth, which are the leading causes of maternal and infant mortality.
Dr. Kara Paddock is a recent addition to the Maternal Fetal Medicine Division in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Wayne State University School of Medicine. She's on the line to help us understand this problem and how to move forward. Welcome to the Metro, Dr. Paddock.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with the maternal mortality rate. What is it and what does it tell us?
Yeah, so the maternal mortality rate looks at rates of pregnant patients who die either during pregnancy or within 1 year of delivery. and it tells us kind of, it's a metric of I guess, care for maternal patients in our country.
Okay, so let's talk about what some of the leading causes of maternal mortality are.
Yes, so actually the leading cause currently is reported to be mental health and those types of comorbidities, but close behind are things like preeclampsia, hypertension, blood clots, hemorrhage, infection, sepsis.
When you say mental health and you're mentioning that as a comorbidity, could you talk about some of the others?
In that category, or of the other?
Yeah, in the comorbidity category.
Yeah, so it would be addiction, suicide, homicide is actually high as well, sadly.
Okay, so that really highlights a broader problem when it comes to mental health care and access to mental health care.
Absolutely.
Now, when we look at Detroit, it's the worst in the nation when it comes to preterm birth rates at over 15%. Can you talk about why preterm births are so dangerous for moms and babies?
Absolutely. So if we think about preterm births, there are broadly two categories. One is where a woman comes in and she's either in labor or she's broken her water, and then a preterm birth ensues that is what we would refer to as spontaneous or happens sort of without medical intervention. And that is called a spontaneous preterm birth. There's another category of preterm birth that we call kind of in medicine medically indicated, meaning mom or baby has a comorbidity or a medical problem or disease that the medical team feels warrants or is an indication to deliver that baby early for a medical reason. And both of these are important contributors to preterm birth, and preterm birth sort of actions and interventions to decrease preterm birth have to focus on both. And that's actually what this study does.
And Dr. Paddock, why is maternal mortality so much worse for pregnant women who are Black, American Indian, and Pacific Islander compared to white, Hispanic, or Asian women?
Yeah, so I think this is a question that has garnered a lot of research and ongoing research, honestly. And I think it's part of what makes it so difficult is that there are so many contributing factors to this. But I do think that undeniably access to care, as well as the quality of care that Black and Hispanic patients receive, as well as the hospitals that serve these patient populations, and possibly and very likely some systemic racism that definitely occurs.
And Dr. Paddock, when we think about just certain things that go into medical care, the differences, especially when we approach different cultures and backgrounds, there is a little bit of a difference there when you have to, or you are helping these women. So has this conversation changed in the courses in the medical school, especially when these questions and these conversations continue to arise about the care for Black, American, Indian, and Pacific Islanders?
Absolutely. So I think the old adage was more that maybe the baseline risk for these patient groups was higher rates of comorbidities, which may be true, but studies have looked at that. And when you account for those confounders, it's actually been found that outcomes are still worse. If you even compare to white patients with the same comorbidities, the outcomes are worse. And actually, if you account for education, even educated Black women have worse outcomes than educated white women. So it's not just baseline risk factors. And so I think that data has really forced medical educators, as well as physicians already in practice, to really look at what are we doing differently between these patient groups. There's been a lot of efforts to address the concept of implicit bias. All providers in Michigan now have to do implicit bias training, where we have to look at our own implicit biases and sort of make changes and see where we can improve on our own level, as well as at a system level.
And Dr. Paddock, when we talk about, of course, what the medical system can do, medical providers can do to help, we often hear women, especially first-time moms, but women in these particular categories, in these groups, who may not know what they need to do preterm or prenatal care that they need to understand and know to keep themselves healthy and safe. So why is it so important for prenatal care and to understand prenatal care?
Absolutely. I think that there's this concept of health equity, and health equity doesn't mean providing everybody with the same care. Health equity means meeting a patient where she, typically our patient, is where she is, and getting her to the same place as everybody else and getting her quality care. So it doesn't mean that everybody needs the same care. It means looking at this patient as an individual and making sure that she's able to reach her full health potential and have a successful pregnancy outcome. And so I think the goal of this initiative and this study is to make sure that all patients are getting best practice care that is individualized to them. There's really only sort of two sort of interventions or tests that we can do in pregnancy that have really been shown to impact outcomes and make a difference in outcomes. And one of those is the administration of aspirin from as early as 12 to 16 weeks during pregnancy. In a patient that is found to have risk factors for preeclampsia, aspirin can reduce their risk of developing preeclampsia by 40% or more. And the other is cervical length screening. And cervical length screening is where we measure the length of the cervix with transvaginal ultrasound between 19 and 23 weeks. And if it's found to be short, then that is associated with an increased risk of preterm birth. And so there are interventions that can be done at that time to reduce that pregnant woman's chance or pregnant person's chance of having a preterm baby. And so these are really the two big things that we know of that are backed by data, that are evidence-based, that are effective in reducing rates of preeclampsia and spontaneous preterm birth.
And just really quickly as well, hitting on that, one of the things that I think about as well that actually Wayne State's doing with their mobile unit, going out to pregnant women, expecting moms, and making sure that they are reaching their appointments and making sure that they are taking care of their prenatal care as well. So if you can go into that little aspect of meeting people where they are, not just prenatally, but also going physically to where these people are, because a lot of the times these are some of the most at risk individuals and they can't make it to their healthcare provider in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that work is so important, is physically reaching people when they are unable to come to, the doctor's office or the hospital. But also an important initiative that's been part of this, or an important piece of this initiative, I should say, is actually transportation. This being an SOS mom, if you enroll in this initiative, which is statewide, you get free transportation to all of your visits. So we know that that's an important barrier to care for all of our pregnant patients in the state. And, so that's something that the enrolling in this study helps with, as well as providing some economic, financial compensation. And then they also get a trained navigator, a one-on-one navigator. And I think that's a really key piece of this as well, is just a contact person telling them, guiding them through what is normal, what should you be looking out for, what could be a problem.
We're speaking with Dr. Kara Paddock. She is the Associate Vice President of Wayne State University's Office of Women's Health. She's also one of the collaborators participating in the SOS Maternity Network. And we also want to hear from you. 313-577-1019. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? And what was it like? Call and let us know at 313-577-1019. Now, Dr. Paddock, you're part of the SOS Maternity Network through Wayne State, and that's a coalition of providers and organizations that are working on the problem of maternal mortality. And it's pretty notable to bring together so many different hospitals and organizations some who are competitors, really, all with this same collective goal in mind. How do you feel it can improve health outcomes?
Absolutely. This study is really under the amazing work of Dr. Hassan, who, as you mentioned, is out of the Office for Women's Health at Wayne State. And it is amazing. It's a first-time collaboration, like you said, between all the major hospital systems in the state. We have involved people in legislation and, even grassroots organizations. And I think this is the type of effort that we need to really address this problem, because there's not one simple solution. And so really it's taking out of the equation where you get your care and just saying this is standard of care, this is best practice. And if we implement this to every woman who deserves, a pregnant person who deserves this type of care, can we make a difference as a population state level for every mom and baby? So I think it's fantastic work.
Now tell me, how do OBGYN physicians and hospitals work with midwives and doulas?
Yeah, excellent. So, most hospitals, I would say, I can speak for our own, have midwives on staff that work both in the outpatient setting as well as on labor and delivery. So if a patient desires that for their care, certainly they should seek that. Doulas, some hospitals have some doulas on staff. Others just allow doulas, to be present at prenatal care visits and on labor and delivery. And so we agree that's a really important part of patient care. We are 100% supportive of that and encourage that, and absolutely help patients find a doula if that's something that they are interested in. We know that support people during pregnancy, during delivery, and after delivery are associated with improved pregnancy outcomes. And so we are 100% on board with that and supportive of doula care for women.
And just to be clear, does the SOS Maternity Network then, does it work with, is that part of, is that baked into the process, is working with midwives and doulas?
It's not. So we don't provide the patient with a doula, but Medicaid does cover doula services for all patients in Michigan at this time, which is really exciting. And so we are able to link patients in with doula services if that's something that they express an interest in.
And Dr. Paddock, before we let you go, with such poor health outcomes in Michigan for pregnant women and infants, there's a lack of trust in the healthcare system and even fears of hospitals, including so many people, including myself. How do you respond to those fears or lack of trust in the healthcare system?
Yeah, I think those fears are very warranted. And, patients have their very important prior experiences that they have had. And so I think validating that and acknowledging that, that happened to them and, not ignoring it is very important. I think taking an approach that kind of empowers women and allows them to take control of their care, informing them of what is the evidence. What does the evidence show? The evidence shows that if you have risk for preeclampsia and you take aspirin, you will significantly reduce that risk. And sort of helping women to become a really integral member of their own care team. And just, knowledge is power. And I think educating women, I think that this should be part of, honestly, public health campaigns. Women should know that this is out there. I dream of a day that women go to their prenatal provider and say, am I a candidate for aspirin? Really holding their provider accountable for what is best practice. But in the meantime, this important initiative at the state level will hopefully reach as many women as we can. We're trying to actually, if we could, we would include every single woman or pregnant person in Michigan, because that's our goal, is to make sure everybody's getting the best possible care.
I love that so much. Education is power. Dr. Kara Paddock is an assistant professor in the maternal fetal medicine division at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Dr. Paddock, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
We also want to hear from you today, 313-577-1019. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? And what was it like? Call us and let us know, 313-577-1019. Coming up, we'll continue talking about the challenges pregnant women face in Michigan, and we'll take your calls about all things childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Now that we've addressed the growing need for a robust natal care in this region, we want to turn to the folks who have a hand in managing the well-being of pregnant women. Birth plans can look different based on the health of the mother and personal preference. We are now joined by two professionals who represent some of the options out there.
That's right. Khadijah Bansfield is a midwife and the owner of the Heart and Soul Midwifery. Miriam Shumalinsky is the clinical director at Honey for Moms. That's a motherhood development center that offers supportive services. Miriam, welcome to the Metro, and Khadijah, welcome as well.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, thanks for having me too.
Hello.
Khadijah, I'm going to start with you. First, for expecting mothers and their partners, could you talk about what goes into a birth plan?
So there's a lot that goes into a birth plan. Typically when moms come to me for care, we discuss a lot about what that means, what, having a birth plan means, what her dream birth experience is. And so we kind of start off with what is your dream birth? How can I best support you during this journey? What are some of the things that you want for your birth experience? Who do you want around you? And what type of support do you want? Obviously, I'm a home birth midwife, and so a lot of times moms are coming to me because they want a home birth. And so we talk a lot about what that looks like. Some want water birth, some don't. Some want a whole bunch of family members around, some don't. And so we really kind of delve into what the whole birth experience would look like. We talk about things they might need to prepare, things they might need to purchase. We talk a lot about education, childbirth prep classes, because even though they're birthing at home, and we pretty much follow a lot of the things that you would expect on a birth plan, we do want to make sure we hear from the mothers exactly what it is that they want.
Khadijah, I'm wondering what you're hearing from the people you work with in terms of why they're saying they want to do a home birth.
Yeah, I love that question. I would say a lot of times that when moms come to me, it's because they have had a family member who's had a home birth or a family member who's had a traumatic hospital birth. And it's kind of they want to live a more positive experience, birth on their own terms. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times moms come to me, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a more positive, autonomous experience.
And it's a perfect segue here because I think about midwives and I think about the historical connection there.
Yes.
We look back and the importance that midwife held in the Black community in particular, especially when we talk about the South and Jim Crow era and onwards through civil rights. It was a need for it. It wasn't just a want, it was a need. So if we can talk about the importance of midwives, of course, in the Black community, but the importance of being advocates for Black women in these spaces.
I find that, I'm hearing a lot of the same stories when I've had Black and brown people come to me wanting a home birth that, it's the same story. It's like I wasn't listened to. I was disrespected. My birth plan wasn't respected. I didn't feel safe. I felt scared. It's like the same narrative over and over again. And I'm just like, why? Yeah. And so sometimes it takes a lot of dialogue when it comes to how can we make this home birth experience or this midwifery care experience transformative and healing, because a lot of times that's what they need. They need a healing experience. And so there's a huge need for Black midwives, and I'm actually the first licensed Black Muslim midwife in the state of Michigan. And I don't say that to brag. I say that. Yeah,
no. Clap in a circle.
And like one of maybe 4 Black licensed midwives in the state of Michigan. And I say that because there's still a lot of work we got to do. I'm happy to say that there's a new wave of Black midwives coming. We're making a comeback here, and it's much needed because we were told that, many years ago when, we talk about the granny midwives and how they care for the communities and how eventually with like laws, they were, kind of wiped out. And so now it's about bringing, reclaiming what was taken from us.
Yes, I know, Robin. Both of our brains just went ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, lots of wheels turning here. And you worked as a midwife in the Arab world.
So I was actually a doula. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, pretty much, the Middle East. And I started my whole birth worker journey in 2012 when I became a doula. And that was something that was very unheard of in Saudi Arabia. It's kind of like what? I would say like they have a much better maternal health care system.
That was going to be my question to you, is the differences that you've observed with their maternal healthcare versus the U.S. Go on, please.
Yeah, so it is a better maternal healthcare system, but at the same time, the culture is very different. Moms aren't listened to. Moms' needs aren't addressed. There's not many options for like home birth or birth center birth. It's very medicalized. And so when the wave of doulas came along and started providing childbirth education, they were not ready for that. But moms really fought for what they wanted. And, I was really proud to see some of the changes that, I was able to make along with the other doula community. But yeah, it was very, very different.
I know that image is just like in my mind right now, just that difference there and the comparison. And then just in my mind, I'm thinking about how we kind of took that education away here in the United States. So many people are actually afraid to give birth at home. But, we're going to get into that conversation a little bit in a moment. But we're going to bring in Miriam into the conversation. And Miriam, let's talk a little bit about your background as well with helping women, especially pre, during, and post when we talk about mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a pivotal component of maternal wellness. At Honey for Moms, we work to support moms at any stage in their motherhood. My own background is a mental health therapist. I am a supervisor and now the director at Honey. And we are cohesively working with midwives, lactation teams, anyone that we can to support positive outcomes. And so many of the times it's working through, like we just heard, past traumas, birth traumas, experiences where individuals are not listened to, experience where they've been maybe harmed by the medical community. Maybe they've had traumatic pasts of their own, and helping them feel powerful and safe in the most vulnerable times in their lives.
We're speaking with Miriam Shumalinsky about issues pregnant women face in this country and Khadijah Bansfield. We also want to hear from you today, 313-577-1019. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? And what was it like? Call and let us know. Again, 313-577-1019. Miriam, I wonder what are some of the lesser known, lesser talked about ways that you feel motherhood is affecting a person's well-being?
Well, motherhood completely changes the way a person sees themselves and the world around them. It's like a part of your body is now disconnected and walking around in the world that we can no longer protect in the way that we would want. And so much of our work is supporting moms through their own experiences of safety, and then being able to live in a world where we can protect the people around us and ourselves when there's so much uncertainty. And again, in the most vulnerable parts of life, whether it's perinatal or postpartum, that is particularly challenging for moms. And we are committed to being able to support moms in a way that we're seeing is just lacking in this country.
Talk about how you are working to make that kind of care accessible.
Yes. Right now, we are growing honey in a national space, connecting with other providers who have access to their communities, to marginalized communities, to communities who don't have as much access to care via remote therapy and medication management services, so that we can reach people larger than the communities that we're in, people who may only hear about us on the radio or see us on the internet, and get help from the comfort of their own home. Every mother deserves to have the support that she needs, and we are committed to making that more accessible so that everybody can feel safe during this really valuable and incredible point in time.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for that. We're going to bring Khadija back into the conversation. Khadija, with accessibility to your services, how do you make them more accessible for women? And what are some current barriers that you're trying to move out of the way for women as well?
Yeah, so I offer sliding scale fees, and I also offer more subsidized fees for clients that are referred to me from Birth Detroit. It's really important to me that midwifery is accessible to anyone and everyone, and I do get a lot of people who are not able to afford the full price of midwifery care services, and so I try really hard to work with them. I barter, longer payment plans, whatever I can to make sure that they aren't robbed of an experience that they really dreamed for.
What is your client list like? Would you say that you have been seeing an increase? What have been some of the trends for you when it comes to people opting for home births, Khadija?
I get a lot. I do get a lot of Black and brown people. I do get a lot of Muslims as well. It's really kind of a mix, I can't really say I have more, but I definitely do have a lot more women of color coming to me. So it's really a really mixed and diverse practice.
I'm wondering more broadly too, if you're seeing more of a demand, if the demand has been steady, if you can look back, let's say, this year versus last year and think, I'm much busier, or things have just remained sort of steady for me.
Definitely. So I didn't expect to be as busy as I am. This is my second year running Heart and Soul Midwifery. January will be 2 years running.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I definitely did not expect to be as busy as I am. And so the call, every time I'm like, oh, what if I don't get clients this month? Or I always get the calls. I always get the calls. And if not, I refer them to somebody else. Nice. Or, the midwives in the community are very busy. And so that's something really beautiful to see. I actually came across an article that planned home births have increased by 60% in the last 70 years. So I'm like, it's definitely, on the rise, definitely trending. But there's still, like I said, there's still a lot of work to do as far as educational awareness.
And one thing I want to go back to when we talk about removing barriers and making the care that you provide more accessible, you do something that a lot of big organizations do, which you said is offer a sliding scale. What does that look like? And is that hard for you to do, because that means you're discounting your services and you are a solo provider? So
yeah, definitely. I don't think I'm gonna be a millionaire as a midwife. So I have a standard package fee, and then another package fee for moms whose sole insurance is Medicaid or they qualify for WIC. Mm-hmm. So it's more or less $1,000 off of that package fee.
Yeah. And, we did give that number out, 313-577-1019. We continue to take your calls. Did you choose a home or hospital birth? What was it like? And once again, 313-577-1019. We're headed to the phone lines right now. We have Jamila here, Jamila Carney. Welcome to the Metro, Jamila.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing really, really well. Just personal tidbit. This is a family friend, personal family friend. Thank you for calling in this morning. But you actually were one of the first people I knew who used a doula and a midwife in your births. And I thought it was so interesting. So if you could just talk about both of your experiences with both of the boys.
Okay, so with baby number one, and both of my children are sons, as you just said, with baby number one, we reached out to our midwife maybe about 8 to 12 weeks. I was being a traditional GYN, and when I asked her about a home birth, she kind of attempted to talk us out of it. She was saying that, if she tried to do a home birth and I ended up needing a cesarean, she would have to grab a kitchen knife or, what I'm saying? It just, yeah. So I kind of went on Facebook and was like, hey, can anybody recommend a midwife? And so someone recommended me to this lady. When I spoke to her, she came over for an interview. She was interviewing us. We were interviewing her because she doesn't work with everybody, It's the energy's got to match type of deal. But anywho, she was I might be saying this wrong, but she was a nurse. She is a nurse practitioner. Mm-hmm. I think that's like the thing that's right below doctor.
Yeah. Yep.
Like she can do everything except surgery.
Yeah.
So she can prescribe medication. She can do stitches. She can do everything that you would get at a doctor's office. And at that point, she had caught so far 300 babies.
Wow.
Yeah, so mind you, between, and I was 8 to 12 weeks. So by the time my son came, she had a few more under her belt. But her payment plan, you had up until the 37th week to finish paying her. And the fee wasn't ridiculous, even though I believe she's gone up since. But what it basically guaranteed is that from the time that you go into active labor, you had her for 48 hours. Oh. Or from the time you go into active labor until 48 hours after the baby is born. Oh. So with my son, it had to be about 11 or so at night when I was having my contractions. We called her. She lives about an hour from me. So by the time she got to my house, it was maybe midnight. And she was here. She was coaching my husband and I. She let everything be as comfortable as you can possibly. I was free to walk and roam around my house, and
yeah.
And what I'm saying? We had.
Jamila, I remember seeing the pool there as well, because you gave birth in the pool, which was something that I also thought was really, really interesting to see, that pool in the bedroom.
Trying to give birth in the pool, I actually did not succeed. Many people have successful water births, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't working for me. And so by the time, let's say they set up the pool at 4 a.m., my son was born 12:30 p.m. the next day. Oh. So the getting in the water, getting out of the water, in the water, out the water, it got cold. I'm tired, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm in labor, and I'm just over it. So actually, by the time my son was born, I was so exhausted that I didn't even have the physical energy to lift my legs to push him up. So there are pictures and footage out there of my delivery, and actually my husband was sitting behind me in the bed, and I was sitting in between his legs. So he was holding my legs up for me because I was too tired to hold my own legs up and push.
So I just want to get to the second, because I know that Baby Neil was pretty easy. Not easy, of course. Nothing's easy about it. But Baby Neil was one of those, calm, cool, collective type of vibes that you had. But the second one was very scary for you. And it was it started off as a home birth, but it was scary. So for some folks who have those fears, you did actually go through that, and it was successful, of course. But if you can give us in 30 seconds just a quick a little bit about the second home birth and how it kind of switched to an emergency situation.
Well, the most important thing I want to say for anyone who's looking for a midwife is get someone who does not have a God complex, that knows their limits.
Okay.
I went in labor about 10 o'clock on Christmas, so that's the 25th. And so, she comes, and we are at this all day and all night. She came to me. My water had been broke about 12 hours. You have about 24 hours from the time your water breaks before you and baby are in a world of trouble. So she comes to me at about 12 hours that my water has been broke. But this is at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night on the 26th. Mind you, we've been at this since the 25th at 10 o'clock at night. And she was like, I don't believe that I can take you any further. She said, I'm not exactly sure what's going on with Michael, but he doesn't seem to be coming, and I think it's time for us to pick a hospital.
Wow.
And she also notified me that the closest hospital to me had a water main break, and that meant that the second closest hospital to me had a flood of people because of the water main break at the first one, and so she then recommended a third one. So we went to that hospital. We attempted to push as it got closer to the 24-hour mark. They said, we're going to go ahead and take him. They, took me into the operating room. I had a C-section. He is perfectly fine. I am perfectly fine. There was no hiccups or anything. It just so happened that because I had gone to 41 weeks, his skull had already fused. Yeah. And in order for a baby to come out, their skull has to still be soft so that it can squeeze through the birth canal. So it just wasn't possible for his skull to squeeze through my birth canal because it was already solid.
Jamila, thank you so very much for taking time out to chat with us about your experiences with home births, both positive and negative, and what people can take away from that. Thank you so very much, and talk to you very, very soon.
And Khadijah Bansfield, I want to bring you back into the conversation for just about 30 seconds. You are a midwife and owner of Heart and Soul Midwifery. Could you tell us in 30 seconds, what do you wish more people would understand about the work that you do?
I would firstly like people to know that there are options, that they don't have to just go to the hospital or, I want them to know that they have options, because a lot of times moms will have traumatic experiences at one place and go back to that same place. I want people to know that, there's so much education out there. And in order to get the birth experience that you want, you got to put the work into it.
And just really quickly, before we let you go as well, just listening to what Jamila just said, if you could just talk about the emergency aspect of it and letting people know that there are risks to it, but,
yes.
Just be prepared.
Yes, definitely be prepared. And, we have to trust the physiological process, but also be prepared for when those emergency cases arise.
Khadijah Bansfield, midwife and owner of Heart and Soul Midwifery, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, we'll continue this conversation with Miriam Shumalinsky, clinical director at Honey for Moms. We'll also add Carolyn Dayton, associate professor at Wayne State University's School of Social Work, to discuss what postnatal care is like. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET-FM, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vinson. We're continuing this conversation about maternity health and all the issues women run into when getting care before, during, and after pregnancy in Michigan. And now we really want to focus on that after part. What it's like for women after they've delivered a child in Michigan.
Are you a mom? And how do you feel in the weeks and months following giving birth? Were you well supported? To discuss that now, we have Carolyn Dayton here. She is an associate professor at Wayne State University School of Social Work and the director of the Early Childhood Support Clinic in Detroit. We still have Khadijah as well, and we have Miriam on the line as well. Thank you all for being here on the Metro.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're going to start with you, Carolyn. What kind of care do mothers need after giving birth? What's some of those basics?
Yeah, so about 20% of moms after they give birth, and actually about 10 to 15% of dads, and both are probably low estimations, but those are the numbers we have, experience some kind of PMAD, and that's perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, often these things are what we say comorbid. They go together, so a mom might have some pretty significant depression. That leaves 80% of moms who are not experiencing those kinds of things, thank heavens. I think in all cases, what we want to make sure we're doing is screening so that we understand what's going on with the individual mom and can give her or him. If it's a dad, dads get this stuff too, so that we can give them what they need following delivery. And PMADs can strike before delivery as well, so it's important to know that as well. So at the Early Childhood Support Clinic, that's what we're doing. We have mental health clinicians on staff there at Wayne Pediatrics, and we are screening moms and dads for PMADs and offering sort of bedside support, because if you're not a mom or a dad who is having extreme sort of depression, anxiety, these kinds of things, you might need some extra TLC, maybe some reassurance, maybe some psychoeducation, these kinds of things. So sort of the idea is that we want to have a range of services in place so we can meet parents where they're at and sort of provide services that they need, depending on where they're at and what they're experiencing. And almost all parents take their babies, infants, toddlers, and young children to pediatrics. And actually, it's interesting because moms, given a shortage of time or a shortage of insurance, they will take their baby for care and sort of forego their own medical care after birth. So OB-GYN clinics would be ideal, but moms aren't always necessarily going back for their 6-week checkup. So pediatrics is the ideal place to be really screening and delivering services to families with new babies.
Thank you for that. I want to actually bring in Khadijah and Miriam to the kind of the same question there about just what it means for women to have this, like, just pre or post being taken care of post pregnancy, of course. So Khadijah, just like we were hearing from Jamila just a little bit earlier, just having that person there with you just a little bit afterwards to make sure that you are okay and you're on the up and up. From your perspective, what's important for moms, especially after giving birth?
Yeah. I always say, like, one of my favorite things about midwifery care is the postpartum care, because we see our moms a lot more often in the postpartum. We're back at the house between 24 to 48 hours, checking up on her, doing the newborn screenings, and then we're back at, some of us are back at weeks 2, 4, and 6. In my practice, I do send a traditional postpartum doula somewhere between days 3 and 5 to provide that extra support. So belly binding, just like other methods of traditional postpartum care, because that art has been lost.
Yeah.
And while the screenings and all of that is great, how can we get to parents before they get to that point? How can we help parents prepare for their postpartum plan?
I mean, Khadijah, honestly, when you talk about tummy binding, that was the one thing that I had no idea about. And then I saw someone doing it. I was like, oh, wow.
Tia, it's not just the one thing. You had no idea.
Yeah, I don't know anything,
about
actually.
this.
Nothing.
We've been amazed, all the things that we've learned from friends and family members about childbirth, and our consistent response. I know this is for you too, Tia, is why didn't anyone tell us about this?
Well, it's because the art is lost. Like, if you look at the society, like, the rates of PMADs, like the perinatal mood disorders, are on the rise. And we ask ourselves why. Why is it that moms are feeling unsupported? Yeah. Why are they going through these conditions? Where everywhere else in the world, like, they receive way better postpartum care. I mean, you look at, like, postpartum hotels in Korea, you can go for up to 30 days and receive postpartum support. Wow. And so I'm actually the founder of the Postpartum Sanctuary Retreat, which will be the first postpartum retreat here in the state of Michigan.
I mean, what does
that look like?
Yeah, so it's basically a place where moms can come and receive 24/7 care, breastfeeding support, nutritious meals, belly binding, massage, and really just being spoiled so that, when they come to us, we heal the whole woman and they can go back and be able to care for their families.
To our expecting moms out there, and to the dads, expecting dads, I'm looking at you, Mr. David Lyons. Send your wives and your moms and whomever they were to a retreat like this one, so they are better prepared to come home and take care of that baby. Want to bring Miriam into this conversation as well, and thinking about that wraparound service, Miriam, especially mental wraparound services for not just the mom, but for the dad and for those who are the caregivers of the baby. What does that look like, especially when we talk about post-giving birth?
Absolutely. Sometimes moms, dads, family members won't even know that what they're experiencing is abnormal or something that they can be getting help with. So part of what we're trying to do is raise awareness in the community that we have resources available. You don't have to be struggling. It's not, quote unquote, normal to be crying excessively and feeling like you can't function after having a baby. You deserve to get support and care during a really, really tricky and stressful time in your life. And having a relationship with a therapist, with a coach, with, a support person can make an incredible difference during that time.
I want to bring Professor Dayton back into the conversation in the last minute or so that we have. I wonder if you could touch on how much farther the U.S. has to go in comparison to other countries to really meet the needs of people when it comes to postnatal care.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I was just sitting here listening to your two other guests and thinking about this. It's pretty cool that you have these three women, these three professionals on your call right now, because that's what we need, right? We need lots of different services, and we need to sort of attack this problem in lots of different ways. So having a supportive midwife, doula, these folks are trusted messengers who know the women and the men, the moms and the dads they're working with. Honey for Moms, I've known many women who have gotten so much help from there. Nature's Playhouse, another wonderful resource. We need to be doing this from multiple perspectives because we don't have that naturally, as you pointed out, in the U.S., right? It's a very medicalized sort of system, childbirth is at this point, and that's in some ways great, right? We have very advanced, wonderful medicine here in the U.S., but maybe we're not taking care of mental health issues in women and men, moms and dads, as much as we could be and should be, right? And so some of that, somebody mentioned the hotels that you could go to in Korea for 30 days. That helps with mental health because it's helping moms rest and relax. So these things are all interrelated, and we need to be having services from I'm fine, I don't need anything except my sister to come help me, all the way to I really need intensive, mental health services because I'm really struggling.
That's right. Carolyn Dayton, Associate Professor at Wayne State University's School of Social Work and the Director of the Early Childhood Support Clinic in Detroit. Miriam Shumalinsky, a Clinical Director at Honey for Moms, and Khadijah Bansfield, a midwife and owner of the Heart and Soul Midwifery. Thank you all so much for joining us today on The Metro.
That's The Metro for Tuesday, November 26th. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Carey Jr. II, Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nick Bender, and our senior producer is David Lyons.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
See you tomorrow.